virtual reality will be able to create a safe space for the oppressed and marginalized group of the Korean society. This is why the distinction between virtual identity and the real identity is very critical, right? Today in my speech, I'll be doing a couple of things. First, mainly I'll be focusing on my arguments. Rebuttals will be heavily integrated in my speech. Now, first argument, virtual reality can create a safe space for minority and marginalized groups, right? Virtual reality will be able to create a safe space for the oppressed group of the current society. 3 layers of analysis. First, there are many marginalized people who cannot express their identity efficiently in their real world, right? This is due to their race or how they're perceived as minority in real life. Having a different color skin or being a gender minority, they are definitely going to face oppression in reality just because of that, and they have no way to change it because ultimately it is part of who they are in real life, right? This kind of virtual persona can help them combat against the oppressive state and status quo. There are gay people who have different political ideologies. Once they do publicly voice their opinions, they're going to be physically oppressed in the reality, right? Such as being a member of the LGBTQ community. When a gay person is publicly out in real life, it basically means that they're going to be facing the actual oppression that people can enforce on them, such as being fired from a job, being discriminated against in school, and so on. This kind of oppression is only applicable in real life because on the internet, you can stay anonymous and find your groups, right? The proposition model is fundamentally harmful to these oppressed groups, right? Because they're requiring people to use their own identity and to use authorization and to confirm their identity online, right? This means that their identity can no longer stay anonymous and they will be exposed. This puts them in a risk where they're going to be oppressed in the reality and they have no safe space in order for them to express their arguments, right? This conceals your identity while being able to find people who support you or in your community, right? Workplace or class, and they're victimized in the current society, and these can only be combated against by the online identity. Second layer of analysis. If people externalize their identity, they can find allies and criticize the majority anonymously, right? If you're anonymous online, you can anonymously construct identities in a personal world. This will enable you to express your political thoughts. Even if you cannot necessarily change a regime, you can still express the identity. They can still express their identity independent from the outcome, right? Why this is important? Because in real life, there's always this risk factor in which has to be associated. These kind of immunity can only be provided by an anonymous online persona, right? Third layer of analysis. You cannot change the oppressive reality, and it is impossible to change it right now, but this is the only way that you can combat against it. Just because you are born in a marginalized world does not mean that you have to face it, right? It is simply unjust, and it has to have a powerful narrative in order to change its status. This is especially important because people with mental health have a safe space in which they can escape from it, right? They might hate their status and their status quo and persona, but they can start new and be a different person online, right? They can seek for help and supports, and social media has a lot more people and group chats, such as peer support group anonymously seeking help without having to face any consequences. They desperately need the separation from reality, and the internet can provide them with that. Why is this an important impact, right? Ultimately, this argument, in real life, majority can push you down because they have money and capital. Workplace will shut down. Female employees that are public feminists will be oppressed. My partner will extend upon that. Will be pushed away in real life. However, online, these kind of regime can stand a chance to be combated. Even if they can't, they face no actual consequences, and there will be no underlying harm, right? Moving on to my second argument, the practical benefit and change of unionization through virtual reality. Before I move on, yes. I'll take your POI.
Taken.
Okay, so whenever people are doxxed online and their identity is spread all over the internet, the result is that they actually are subject to real life harms. Why can you say that internet harms aren't that bad, and why can you say that they don't actually lead to real life harms?
See, the thing is, at least for majority of people, they have this kind of immunity, right? And also, we believe that these kind of online, these kind of in real life accountability that was taken from online is actually beneficial at the end of the day. Because I'll be talking about it later, but the Me Too movement, which extended from unionization, they actually were able to take accountability of the people who actually cause real life harms, right? They can continue with my second argument. They can apply actual change by uniting people online. By publicizing political and progressive ideas in a conservative world, people living in that society will be able to unite people who think the same, but not necessarily look like it in real life, right? They can anonymously find allies and construct their identities without having to face any real life consequences. This will be able to unite people who think the same, and this is the most efficient way to do so, as in real life, there's no other way to do so. This will be the combat against a dominant regime, right? As I have mentioned earlier, the Me Too movement, where women were able to unite their stories and actually take accountability of their oppressors. These kind of online movements that are pushed forward by anonymous users are very important because this ensures their identity to stay hidden while they take actual people who cause harm accountable, right? The Arab strain, which has a revolution in Arab and Twitter, in which they form their allies through Twitter and publicize their political activities, right? This is how they pressure their government and fought for human rights. Ultimately, the government side can say, oh, but you cannot always ensure that the online anonymous identity will like stay safe, right? But however, like thinking about the comparison on government side, they're publicizing all identities, right? They're actually taking away this only combat that they can have against the dominant like narrative of the society, which people with capital, people with power can oppress you whatever they want, right? They give you no protection from this kind of toxic narrative, while on an opposition side, we actually give you a chance to combat against this kind of oppression. Thank you. Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we want you to escape the utopia that the proposition side is giving you and face the reality. So how to oppose? 3 things in my speech for you today. First, responses. Second, extensions. And lastly, true vote analysis to clearly show you where we have taken the upground in this debate. First, several refutations. Firstly, they tell you about how it is easy to avoid the risk of getting exposed. 2 layers of analysis to this. First, we think that laws will exist on both sides of the world, and that this is more of an issue of social media regulation. Because on either side, corporations and governments step in for regulating social media and making sure no exploitative things are getting posted. Like on either side, cyberbullying and crime is going to be punished regardless. So we think that the laws in place are enough of a deterrence to prevent them from committing online crime and holding them accountable. So thus, their whole argument here is obviously symmetrical to us. Second, we also know that when we join a social, we also have to note that when we join a social media, we automatically give them our information, like the social media, like our gender, email, and stuff like that, and like phone numbers, right? This means that social media can still track you down if you do something wrong. So ultimately, their whole first case is not mutually exclusive and is symmetrical on both sides of the house. Thus, should not be weighed in this debate. Secondly, to tell you about defamation, however, we are willing to trade this off because we see open discourse and awareness as more important, simply because it is more mutually exclusive and it holds more of a long-term impact on humanity, which I'll be explaining more throughout my speech. Third, they tell you about deterrence. We show that this deterrence is what is inherently bad, unless it is an online crime, which once again is symmetrical. But we tell you that this deterrence for just free speech is inherently bad because we are taking away their voice on a platform created to support liberal democracy and free speech in a safe space around the world. Notice how 1, this is not a good thing, so it is flipped, and 2, how principally it doesn't go against the actual intent of what social media was created to be. Thirdly, they tell you about defamation. Once again, symmetrical on both sides of the world. And if you're talking about crime, again, this is once again a completely different topic for a completely different debate. Fourthly, they tell you about the freedom of ideology. However, we tell you that unless it is a literal crime, unless it is literal hate speech, it is not something that we can stop, and it is not something that we can restrict. Proposition is literally supporting a thought crime because people have the right to think what they think, and if it's not actively hurting someone, then they have the right to say it. And then they think that this clash is of the reactive versus proactive, which I'll be explaining more throughout my speech later at the clash points. Fifth, they tell you about how real identity can be exposed in the POI, right? However, we told you about how the comparative here is a world where you can outright say a world where you outright get exposed on social media, your name and your address and everything, or a world where it's still much harder to find your identity in real life. So our chances of that happening in our side of the world is significantly less because theirs is 100 and ours is not 100. 6, they tell you about separation can exist in LGBTQ communities and how separation can exist, like for example, LGBTQ communities. However, notice how all of the examples that they gave here are the ones that were significantly supported by the online world. For example, LGBTQ community was found many more allies all throughout the world, like Japan, right, through social media. How would these conservative countries have gotten these types of globalized Western liberal democratic ideas if it wasn't for the spread of social media and if it wasn't for these people who have these like fake identities being able to join online in such a conservative society, right? I think our LO has given you enough explanation on this. And also they failed to tell us why people in conservative places can also join these kinds of things without the shame from their community, which is why inherently their point here does not stand. 7, they tell you about how they can increase privacy and security like politics, right? However, we don't think that these people, regardless of their ideas, always need to hide it. We want free speech. Just because you don't agree with their writers' ideas because you're a leftist doesn't mean that I can take away their voice. Their opinion is still their opinion and the government can't take it away unless they're providing active harm, which we think we've already explained to you multiple times throughout this debate. 8, they tell you about state authority has the power to delete it, and they give you an example of China. The example here is very funny to us because they use a communist country that's famous for stealing social media and use it to generalize the world's social media. And we tell you that this is even worse on their side of the world because 1, China will do what they want regardless. They already have the power, they have the capital, they don't care what you do. Secondly, China literally now has all of our personal information, which is much bigger of a risk. Also, misinformation can once again be fixed by other ways, regulations. And we also tell you that for these people with extreme views, they're not really a big stakeholder in this debate in the first place, right? Because regardless of whether their name is out there or not, we see huge celebrities and figures coming out with their controversial views like abortion or being far right, far left, etc. Right? So we tell that these extremist people and these criminals are not a stakeholder in this debate and thus should not be weighed in this debate when you do adjudication. 9, they tell you about how they can create programs to help them. However, they never explain why we can't do this as well. We aren't saying that every single person has to hide it. We think that if they want to show their identity as a minority, they can. But we think that the people who want to do this is very little because in the status quo, not everyone in the world likes minorities. Not everyone supports them. Many people don't support them. We see this in the status quo, right? And many of them get hate crime on social media, which is why they want to stay private. Ultimately, we think that there's less number of minorities who want to stay open. They want to stay open. Lastly, they tell you about the majority versus minority. However, we disagree with this premise because we need to protect the people that are most vulnerable. We need to protect the people that need our help the most, and the majority is doing fine without us. All further responses will be integrated throughout my speech. Now, let's make sentence from my LO. Our third signpost is about how to active discourse statement. A lot of people revealing identity and discourse online allows for more people to freely talk about issues that increase exposure. Explanations. First, some status quo analysis for you. The status quo is where many people are against movements like feminism because they are deemed as selfish, because they're deemed as male-hating, and because of the misinformation. This means that in jobs or in real life, many people are scared to talk about these somewhat controversial issues like feminism or Black Lives Matter, as there's a huge lack of awareness, huge lack of discourse on many of these issues because people are afraid of how people will view them. For example, companies, right, with strict seniority relationship where it's highly male-dominated, it's very hard for women to speak about their feminist views. For example, dating and meeting new people, sometimes people hide the fact that they're feminist because they don't want to get rejected by the significant other. We tell you that on our side of the world, this is fixed. Why? Because of the effect. We tell you that in our world, there's a huge increase in discourse and there's a huge increase in people's accessibility to taboo issues online, especially if they live in a controversial or a conservative nation, because now there's more Instagram info pages about these issues, there's more Snapchat stories, there's more Facebook coverage, etc. Simply because these people are no longer scared that their identity is going to get exposed. They're no longer scared that what they say is going to directly harm them in their process of getting a job or their process of getting married, their process of finding a significant other. We tell you that there's a huge increase in discourse because this fear factor is no longer there for them to speak about these somewhat controversial social issues, which are very much necessary in our society. So what exactly is the impact of this? Now more people know about the issue and more people have the incentive to get educated and make a change. We show that simply a huge reason why people don't take action right now in the status quo is the lack of awareness and because they don't know what's happening in the world, especially with the education system, where we don't really have these kind of education on social issues and we aren't actively taught. We tell you that with more discourse on social media, where many young people are on, many old people are on, with more people angry about it, we can do significant things. For example, first, let's look at how we were able to change police immunity have a first step to changing police immunity when George Floyd's police, who killed him as a black hate crime, was now put in jail. Second, look at how in Korea, the child of this case, when they were able to shift laws and narratives of how the emergency of child abuse in Korea, and how murder is murder and abuse is abuse, whether you are their parent or not, and how we were able to shift that narrative there and create legislative change. We tell you that things like this, legislative change, narrative change, can happen uniquely in our world because one, we have more people. We already told you about how we can gain more supporters because people aren't scared of the way people view them in real life. Two, online petitions are especially important in the online world with the rise of COVID-19. And three, we can make a real change in, for example, legislators. We can make real changes. We can make narrative changes. We can make legislative shifts. And we've already seen this happen in the status quo due to online discourse, due to online conversation. Because these things, the things I told you about things I told you about Black Lives Matter would have never happened without the support that we got from the online society. Ultimately, unless proposition can tell us that spreading awareness is a bad thing, they cannot flip this argument and share. We told that simply because we already take this debate because we are the side provides the most significant impact for the most people, and I've been never proud to oppose. Thank you.
3, 2, 1. Thank you, Chairperson. It's very interesting that Uraka Kaiwa does not really defend existence of secret account. I think today's proposition is talking about very extreme case and scenarios such as hate speech and radical defamation versus we defend the vast majority of cases that minority people are exposed to persecution and discrimination on daily basis. So if they can externalize their identity or their political grievances in online sphere with the security and safety, that's much better society. So we defend larger utility for larger number of people compared to very specific rare case from the other side of the house. If they literally talk about crimes, like you meet anonymous people and you physically commit sexual harassment or sexual violence when you meet those people in reality, and that's a totally different debate. And we are happy to punish those people, and those people are already captured. I don't think that's a relevant topic here. Because even in the past, like 50 years ago, or 60 years ago, the heinous crimes happened with or without online and internet community. So those kind of people, if we talk about very heinous criminal and those people commit crimes anyway, I don't think that's relevant context in this debate. Considering that, I would like to give two questions. First of all, is defamation serious enough compared to the rights of marginalized community to externalize their political grievances? Secondly, how practically can we combat oppressions? On the first level, is defamation serious enough compared to the rights of minority? So basic problem presented by the other side of the house is online slander, online defamation and hate speech and radical critiques hurt a lot of people. 5 responses. 1, I don't think their approach does not reduce the number of people who post offensive and provocative critique and defamation. Because those people believe it is justice to criticize Kimura Hana or celebrity. It is justice to openly and anonymously or openly criticize famous people. Those kind of people will continue to embrace same level of ideological justice. I don't think defamation will reduce if that is a characterization. Secondly, a lot more people are defamed. In the reality, we are talking about minority groups. Gay people are expelled from the community in the Catholic Church, but they cannot sue Catholic Church anyway. So it is fair for those gay communities or gay individuals and couples to externalize their political grievances at least online, at least in somewhere outside the reality. That's a fundamental right for these individuals to defend their honor, to defend their self-defense security. Number 3, the deterrence power is what the Prime Minister explained. Under their model, deterrence power exists, so people become a lot more cautious when they post comments. That's the exact problem. That's what we call chilling effect. People voluntarily silence them up if they think that someone is watching you. The sexually harassed young employees in Dentsu used to make grievances in her own Uraaka in the past because that was the only place for her to externalize her own grievances. If boss is watching you, if society is watching you, where else can she make complaint? And that deterrence power is really cruel and really exploitative and dangerous. Fourthly, what Deputy Prime Minister explained is that because of criminal persecution, people will less likely to make hate speech literally. That's the problem. Oppressed gay individuals cannot openly criticize Catholic Church anymore. That's not, the oppressed individuals, gay, LGBT communities cannot criticize Catholic Church online anymore. Under their model, oppressed women in Pakistan cannot criticize local religious leaders on their model anymore. So hate speech, the rhetoric of hate speech is abused by the hands of authority and strong individuals. That is rhetoric for authority to oppress individuals, even online. And that's the exact rhetoric that empowers and fuels existing oppressions. Fifthly and finally, even if we acknowledge some defamation still happens, we think it's better if larger number of disenfranchised individuals can externalize and vocalize their political grievances. So we are having counter trade-off. Yes, we agree that some people feel uncomfortable under their model, under our model, but a lot more people are able to exercise their fundamental rights and core part of identity to externalize their identity and the political ideology that they would be persecuted otherwise in their social community in real life. So conclusion, yes, we acknowledge that defamation happens, but that's necessary and legitimate, and reciprocally individuals and marginalized groups of community have a right to externalize provocative expressions. Moving on to the practical consequences, how we can combat practically oppressions. So the alternative scenario explained by the Deputy Prime Minister is that separation still exists under their model. For example, they have gay community, right? But the first entry barrier is very high. You need to first contact a member of those community. If you're anonymous, if the conversation is done online, separating from your identity, you feel a lot more comfortable to contact a member of those gay communities to begin with. Secondly, Duana is worried about the existence of espionage. What if anti-gay people might disguise themselves and espionage in the community? That still happens in both paradigms. That's not mutually exclusive. Even within the physical community, those kind of people might exist. That's not unique in online. Finally, if we can increase the number of passwords and enforce better security in the Facebook accounts, that we can better empower political activity. That's not relevant to the motion. That's more about security level of accounts that's independent from distinction between online identity versus offline identity. Finally, about the fake news and how we combat fake news, right? 3 levels of responses to the problem and anxiety about fake news. 1, who spread fake news? The kind of people who spread fake news believe that it is correct information, it is true information. Like people, those who believe in conspiracy theory. Those kind of people will continue to believe in exactly the same way. I don't think distinction between offline and online identity will do something about those kind of people. 2, if the logic from the other side of the house is if the member of Uyghur community point out the mistake of information, a lot more people will believe in that. If members of those marginalized communities are brave enough to openly criticize the mistake, they already do so. A lot of people cannot do so because of fear and intimidation. That is why anonymity online is critically necessary in order to combat the misinformation and fake news as well. Moreover, the professionals or scholars or the professors usually openly point out the mistake of incorrect information even in the status quo, even under our model. Even under our model, some people are willing to show off face like me to openly criticize something. Therefore, we can still combat fake news. As opposed to that, what we have brought to the table is very simple. On the first level, we can diversify discourses through which a lot more people are exposed to countervailing views through which they can change mind. Secondly, we can empower political movements, just like the Me Too movement and the Arab Spring movement. Do we think that we can fundamentally change oppressive society? No. But do we think we can change the largest number of people's mindset? Yes, we believe so. This kind of diversification of discourse and empowerment of political activity might still have impact at least large number of moderate people who are open-minded. Therefore, we believe, regardless of failure and success, we believe it's a right for this individual to try out. That is what we oppose. Thank you.
Now, I'm a victim of the Chinese regulation. I'm very proud to propose. First, let me talk about why the reliance on the Chinese example does not stand right. First of all, the Chinese government will have the power to take accountability of free speech anyways, as they have never given us the characterization in which they will be able to regulate that, right? Second of all, it will only make matter worse because Chinese government will equally be able to spot the victims, right? If not faster, because their real life information are registered online. Their entire case relies on this unrealistic rule, right? Ultimately, this debate is about which side will be able to ensure the rights of people. We're telling you using online personas can do 2 benefits. 1, the safe space for people to get to escape to, and 2nd, the ability for people to unify other people, right? 2 responses we got. First, the exposure of people who have the fascist ideas and who are criminally active on social media, right? Our DLL has told you about how it's not going to be mutually exclusive on both sides due to the fact that government will be able to take accountability of action with laws. It is never logical for them to say that criminal activities will be able to spread and do whatever they want on our side of the law, right? Now, they might use cyberbullying and how it is easier to cyberbully to happen on our side. However, cyberbullying is also a crime, meaning that there is no mutual exclusivity on this. Now, we also tell you that this issue is significantly worse on their side because now bullies from school can find you and bully you at home. So now your safe space at home and online is both gone, right? Also, many bullies or extremists don't really care whether or not their identity is revealed simply because they strongly believe on these ideas. And we give public figures as an example for this, right? This takes down their entire cyberbullying case in which we have seen it is the only harm that they can propose, right? They also told you how they can somehow protect minorities and support groups and stuff, but we already told you that many people in this world dislike minorities, and thus there's a higher chance for them to get attacked and defended, especially when jobs and significant others can find your identity, right? In their world, there is a fear factor in defending minorities, and we tell you that this is significantly decreases in our world, right? Also, for fake news, and we've told you that once again, this is symmetrical because the people who spread it actually believes it, right? Even taking the opposition side as their best case scenario, the most they can do is prevent cyberbullying and not to make people get attacked for spreading suspected misinformation, right? Which seems pretty familiar to me as a cyberbullying impact. Their long-lasting impact and their only impact is to prevent cyberbullying, right? Second, the spread of fake news, which our web speaker had already told you fundamentally, they only do it because they believe so, right? Their best case scenario is that deterrence is significant, but we already told you that this deterrence is fundamentally bad because First, it goes against the principle for what a social media is for, as it's supposed to be liberal democracy and freedom of speech. Second, unless they're committing a literal crime, they have the right to say their opinion and express it, right? We don't think that restricting free speech and thought is acceptable, and we think proposition is supporting a literal thought crime, right? While what is the best case of our world, right? We told you that we have this platform to combat against the oppressive society, to combat against the oppressive government, in which we have already seen in the Arab Spring example where they were able to rebel against the authoritarian government, right? This is a way significant impact in which the risk of taking real life consequences will be eliminated, right? The risk of risking personal security will be eliminated, right? Most importantly, the action of human rights and seeking for it will be able to be promoted on our side of the scenario, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to take this debate because although from our LO, we told you about mutual exclusivity and symmetry, side proposition fails to respond to this, right? They never proved that regulation don't work, for they never proved that literal entire justice system is corrupt, and never proved why our side can claim all the benefits they claim to have, since most of their arguments have been symmetrical to us, right? That is why I very proudly oppose and thank you.